welcome to Solo Ship Week 2. I'm Squirrel Patrol. He's JMtoWin. JM, how was your Week 1 in the NFL?
How was your Week 1?
It was good. I kind of made a joke that it was a very Squirrel Patrol weekend. I finished with about the same amount in my bank, not my bank account, but in my FanDuel and DraftKings accounts at the end of the week as the start of the week. But I won a live final seat on FanDuel, won a King of the Beach seats on DraftKings. So I picked up a couple of live final seats basically for free. So I'll take that. My one big regret on the weekend, on the Sunday, was that I always put my best single entry roster into the $5,000 FanDuel qualifier. It's the one I put the most thought into. And I generally just carry that through to about one every 5 or 6 of my single entry contests, and then put all those those 5 or 6 single entry contests in all of my GPPs. And that one lineup I did was the best lineup I had on FanDuel. So everything I did after that was a waste of time. I should have just done that one lineup, and it would have finished second in the monster for 100,000. And I had 30 monster entries. I just didn't carry the lineup through.
Interesting. Yeah, I had a kind of a similar thing where I've said it was one of the most challenging, profitable weeks to put behind me. My main build was a variation off of my favorite roster. So my favorite roster finished second in the chop block, and it finished 7th in, I forget what it was, but some other 3 max tournament with 1,500 entries, but would have won the game changer for 100K. And I took that roster and decided not to go with Puka Nacua in the game changer, and went a different direction, made a couple of changes on that roster. So it was that roster. And then I was as a roster I loved, and I was I don't think I can do this in the game changer. So I switched it up. So had a profitable weekend, but kind of fumbled 100K right through my fingers. So put it behind me on Monday and onto a new week this week, and we'll take our shots again.
Yeah, it's a funny life we live,
isn't it?
Yeah, where we make these decisions it cost me 100K, but it didn't really cost 100K. It's just it's got to make those kind of split decisions, and you going into week 1, you're kind of thinking I don't know about Puka Nacua, right? He could do well.
Yeah. But, I mean, he was, I think in most tournaments he was 0.2% owned, and I had 5% exposure to him, and I had him on some of my $50, $100 single entry 3 max stuff. So in those terms, I had more money exposed to him than 99.95% of the field. But I did have enough confidence on that play that I was back and forth on or I should say I had enough confidence on that roster that I was back and forth on it, and made that decision kind of the wrong direction. It's similar with you. You would typically carry that FanDuel single entry qualifier roster over to the monster, and didn't. And then it's those opportunities come again. Maybe not this weekend. One of the things I said this week is on Sunday morning before games kicked off, I knew I was 1-0 on the season because I took the time to assess my play, and it was how did I do this week? How are my rosters? Regardless of results, I'm 1-0. I put in one really good week. And so this week I might go 2-0, and it might be a week that lines up horribly for my style of play. And I might lose 70% of my entry fees, and that's okay too, right? It's not like I can just make it back. It's not like this week is going to be the next opportunity I have to have that big payout, because every week kind of lines up a little bit differently. For some weeks don't line up with my style of play, but as long as I keep putting in a win each week, then those results come over time. So it is what it is, and you pack your bags and move on.
Yeah. So you don't think this week lines up particularly well for your style?
Oh, I do, but I always think every week does, right? And then some weeks it's the way things play out. It's the way it whether it's Jamal Williams chalk week and he has the longest run of his career and his second 100-yard game of his career and scores 3 touchdowns, and you're I literally never would have played him with significant money behind him because I felt that's bad chalk, right? So certain weeks you come out and you're it wasn't going to be my week because of the way it shook out. But no, I'm really excited about this week. I think it lines up. I have a good feel for it, and I think it lines up well.
Okay. So hot takes. We are mandatory hot takes. What are you thinking about this weekend? What do you think is gonna a take you've got that maybe nobody else has?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and put my stamp on. So last week it was Miles Sanders wrong on the production, but 18 carries, 6 targets. So right on the usage. This week, I will say that Noah Brown will not be a starter on the Texans by the time he's healthy again, because Tank Dell is going to seize control of that role. Player I really, really like. And I think he's like similar to Puka. He's a legit NFL starter, like a really good player who creates tons of separation, gets open, commands targets. So I kind of expect, depending on how much the Texans want to throw, but I expect anywhere from 5 to 8 targets for him. He's 3,200. He's a guy I really like this week. And realistically, given his skill set, and his target range, he should be priced about 4,700 to 4,900. So I think he's a screaming value this week. I think that he'll make a name for himself to some extent this week. Whether the volume's there for that to be like a huge name, we'll see. But going to be a standout player for sure.
Okay, yeah. I mean, that could be the winning ticket there with Tank Dell. and speaking of tickets, more memories are made when you're there for live NFL action. And when you need tickets, Ticketmaster's got you covered. As the official marketplace of the NFL, Ticketmaster gives you more ways to find your perfect seat. Their interactive seat map gives you 360-degree previews of your section to make sure you have the best view of those pivotal plays. And if your plans change, Ticketmaster gives you more flexibility to sell or transfer your tickets. Plus, mobile tickets make getting in on game day a breeze, and you can even customize your Ticketmaster app to rep your team's colors. Find tickets today at Ticketmaster.com/NFL. Little word from our sponsor, or one of our sponsors.
Is that what that was?
Yeah. No, it's just going on. So hot takes from me. I think last week I said the Commanders defense was going to be the lowest scoring defense. That didn't come to fruition. I did fade, the Commanders defense, but it really just didn't matter that much. So
everybody scored 11 points, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Everybody scored 11 points.
Yeah. So I think this week I'm going to run it back with a similar take, but I'm going to tone it down a little bit. I'm going to go, I think the Dallas Cowboys defense is going to be popular. I think it's probably going to be like a little bit too popular, maybe a 20% ownership. I'm going to say, though, that I think the Jets beat the Cowboys today or on Sunday in Dallas behind Zach Wilson, handing the ball off to Breece Hall and Dalvin Cook.
I like that. I like it. I like because I've been looking at that Cowboys defense and I've been saying that same thing of if I'm the Jets, the Jets defense is so good. The Cowboys defense, they talked coming into the season about wanting to be the greatest defense of all time, right? They're on that level. So are the 49ers defense, but the Jets top 3 defense in the league, it's got to be those 3. And the Jets are ferocious. So they're not scared about getting beat in a blowout. And so they're going to say, let's just keep the ball on the ground. Let's play field position. Let's force the Cowboys to try to score against us. Let's see if we can make them make a mistake before we make a mistake. I don't think there's going to be a ton of dropbacks from the Jets. I don't think there's going to be a ton of opportunities for sacks and turnovers. And it wouldn't shock me for the Cowboys defense to come out of that game with, 8 defense special teams points on DraftKings, 4K in salary. I think they're an interesting play. They'll be in my player pool, but that's mostly a result of defense feels pretty thin this week in general. So I want to take some swings, but definitely not going heavy on there like I think a lot of other people will.
Yeah, I think I've almost got this down to a formula where if I'm picking a chalky quarterback in a chalky game stack, and I think I'm going to end up overweight the chalkier game stacks this week, then I'm probably going to go with the defense that's not the chalk defense, and vice versa. Like if I'm reaching to take a quarterback that I think is going to be lower owned, but could hit, then I'm okay taking the Cowboys defense. And that actually works out well because if I'm taking the Cowboys defense this week, they're more expensive compared to the Commanders last week. And if I'm taking an off the board quarterback, I think it's more likely, an off the board game stack. It's more likely to be a cheaper game stack anyway.
What are some of the off the board quarterbacks that you could have interest in this week?
So I think it works better on DraftKings than FanDuel, because on FanDuel the quarterback pricing tends to be pretty condensed. But I will say that the difference in pricing for like Lamar Jackson is one of the bigger differences I've seen, where I think he's 7,700 on DraftKings, and he's the 3rd most expensive quarterback. And then he's 7,600 on FanDuel, but that's still 6th.
Relative to the salary cap, there's a nice discount.
Yeah, but he scores better on FanDuel than on DraftKings because the 6 point rushing touchdowns have a bigger impact if you don't have like full point per reception scoring, and there's also like he's generally not going to get the 3 point, 300-yard
Yeah,
bonus.
yeah,
But on DraftKings, I kind of like Baker Mayfield again. He has only 5,100, playing at home, so he's not playing in a dome this week. But he's playing a Chicago defense that hasn't looked good. So I like Mayfield. A little bit of Jordan Love. Like that's going to be a mass multi-entry pick. I think. I think that game's got one of the lower point totals on the week. And I can see a bunch of ways where that's just a very low scoring game, but it is going to be in a dome. And so we don't know the stats for Christian Watson. We record this on Friday afternoons where we're just starting to get like the practice news. So we're just broke. I think Austin Eckler did not practice, and that could have a big impact on the slate if he misses the game. But Christian Watson's questionable. So they've got the tight end Musgrave. So he's really cheap, I think, for what would be like a main receiving piece at tight end if it shakes out like that. And then I just think Jordan Love is maybe a little bit better than people are expecting, and he's super cheap on DraftKings. I think 5,500. So I think that's a reasonable play. Those are plays I'm probably not going to use in single entry. Just stick with the theme of the show. Probably I'd be more likely to use Mayfield than Jordan Love. But yeah, it's just some off the board plays. And actually one play that's growing on me a little bit down in that cheaper range is Brock Purdy with the 49ers.
Yeah. I like Brock Purdy. I mean, 7 out of 9, their last 9 regular season games, they've scored 30 plus in 7 of them. And that's just a lot of touchdowns available. And Purdy's always in this 18 to 22 point range, but it's very easy for, say, the Rams keep this game closer. All of a sudden, the 49ers aren't taking their foot off the gas late in the third quarter like they typically do. And Purdy has a shot at 300 yards, or Debo breaks along, a short catch for a long run and he hits 300 yards, or he goes for 3 touchdowns. Like the opportunity is there. He has I think it was a 38 pointer on his ledger. The opportunity is there for him to put up a big game. I like Purdy a lot. And Daniel Jones, another guy, there's a lot of good quarterbacks like Josh Allen's a great play this week. Mahomes, Trevor Lawrence, probably really good plays. Geno, Jared Goff have potential to be good plays. So I don't know how far off the board I'll go, but I've got like 9 guys in my player pool that are in the mix for me in single entry. And again, you and I have talked about this. For us, it's not like we're going to build one roster and put them into all our single entries. It's like we're going to build some different single entries and put them into single entries. But yeah, Daniel Jones is another one where after last week, I could see everybody being off. And then you look through the game logs from last year, and you're like, here's a 30-pointer, here's a 30-pointer, here's a 30-pointer. It wouldn't shock me if he has one of those games this week. So I think he's my kind of off the board guy. You mentioned Baker Mayfield. I'll tell you a guy from that game I started thinking about last night, DJ Moore. And now Carlton Davis is going to be out for the Bucs. And just the way that Bucs defense plays, they force a lot of passing. And if you can find holes in that zone, you just keep catching passes and moving down the field. And nobody's going to play DJ Moore after he had 2 targets last week. He's only 5,500. Has a lot of ceiling in this. It would seem like the type of week where the Bears are going to say, man, we only got DJ Moore 2 targets last week. Let's emphasize. Like, wouldn't surprise us if you turn on the TV at 20 minutes after kickoff and DJ Moore has 4 targets already, because on that first drive, the Bears are like, let's get him involved. So yeah, I think he's an interesting play in that game. And actually kind of most of my wide receivers are tied to these game environments I like this week, but he's kind of one of the only one-off pieces that I could see pushing onto my tighter builds this week.
Yeah, so like you mentioned the DJ Moore thing, and I think you maybe referenced something similar in the 1 week season write up for Kansas City, like Kadarius Toney, like these guys that had notably bad week ones. They're not like DJ Moore just a targets thing, but where the team is maybe going to make a concerted effort to flip that around, like early in the season, so that people are forgetting. Like right now, Kadarius Toney is the drops guy. If you see somebody like drop something on the street, they just pull the Kadarius Toney. Like now, but it's a long season. Like Kansas City's got playoff aspirations. Like they want to turn that around so that nobody's like thinking about that by week 7, by week 8, if they want him to be a key player for them. And yeah, I could see a similar thing with DJ Moore where, yeah, we just, we want to get this guy targets. We brought him in to get him targets. Kind of saw that on last night with Swift, right? Like the
Yeah.
Eagles running back. Uh, where they brought him in the offseason, like they didn't give him a lot of work in game one. And then suddenly the opportunity opens up to start giving him more work.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that like DJ Moore is one of those kind of invisible guys who pushes onto tighter builds for me. And then I think that kind of ties into this discussion of what does this week really look like, which to me, it's, I said on my show with Pete Overzet that my player pool for like single entry 3 max is broader than it normally is, has more players in it than it normally has. But my player pool for mass multi-entry is going to be smaller than it normally is, because it's just like there's only a few spots. Like there's a few spots to me that are kind of head and shoulders above the rest of the slate, but then there's nothing that truly separates those spots from each other to where, I'm like, oh, I'm doing this, right? So to me, it's going to come down to how do my rosters come together and which rosters do I like the most as opposed to which spots. But I'm not necessarily trying to rank the Buffalo offense and the Kansas City offense, the Jacksonville offense, and some of the pieces from Detroit. And, one of the things that I've been highlighting this week, the Titans devour the run game. And last year faced the highest opponent pass play rate in the NFL by a pretty wide margin, the most pass attempts per game in the NFL. So I like those Chargers pass game pieces. And then if Eckler's out, like everybody's going to be on Josh Kelly like they were on Jamal Williams last week against the Titans. Jamal Williams did that 11-yard run. I think he had 11 carries for 21 yards, something like that. Like Kelly's rushing stats are going to look like that. And then is he just going to step in and get 9 targets like Eckler does? Probably not. So then Keenan Allen has this chance to be this like 14 to 16 target guy. So it's kind of like I'm not Friday. I'm not trying to rank those spots. Even Saturday night, I'm going to be making my mass multi-entry builds off of a limited number of spots. And then I'll kind of start looking at how those rosters are coming together and pick which ones I want to put in single entry. So that's kind of how I see this week. I'm curious your thoughts on that. Is like there's more spots at the top, but they're pretty far above the spots behind them.
It's like having you go to Keenan Allen is one of the biggest like early season twists in the NFL season. Because you've described him as a guy he's going to give you receptions, but he's just never going to win you a tournament.
Yeah, I always use the example of don't play him in tournaments because he's just good for his consistency, not for his ceiling. And and that's another unique thing. Like Tyreek Hill's off the slate, Justin Jefferson's off the slate, Devontae Adams is playing the Bills. Austin Eckler could be out. Christian McCaffrey doesn't get the 14 targets in San Francisco that he got in Carolina. So it's like there aren't a lot of opportunities for 35 to 40 point scores. So Keenan Allen puts up 25, 26. Stephon Diggs puts up 28. Like those guys become more valuable than they typically are.
Actually, you do bring up an interesting point that there's a lot of good wide receivers that are off the slate, and that makes an impact. Like I think I'm more likely to stick to just a few concentrated game stacks. And I think for mass multi-entry, I might almost be doing the opposite of what you're doing, where for mass multi-entry, I could see these games that we've talked about already. We've actually almost talked about all of the games with point totals below 45, going from like Daniel Jones and Arizona to, San Francisco and the Rams, the Chargers and Tennessee. I could see those games blowing up, Chicago and Tampa Bay. But if they do, I'm probably going to be overstacking them in mass multi-entry. Whereas in single entry, there's a handful of games that have higher point totals. And I think those games could just go nuts. And I think that's a more likely thing that's going to win me money in single entry is one of the games that has a higher point total than one of the games. Like I think one of the games has like a 40 to 42 point total overshooting that could win me $1 million, right? That could win me a million maker. Whereas I think for single entry, I don't know if I need to stray from these kind of core games. I think my favorite is I think Buffalo and the Raiders. And I was actually interested when you were talking about the wide receivers. They've kind of been scratched off the slate with with Tyreek Hill not being on the slate, Justin Jefferson not being on the slate. You're kind of like and Devontae Adams is facing the Bills. Like, are you lower on Devontae Adams this week? Because I think he's going to be popular, but like Jacoby Myers is now out. And we've seen him just get peppered with targets before.
Yeah, I mean, I got a lot of respect for that Bills secondary when they're healthy, as just one of the toughest defenses to put up points against. And so does that mean that Devontae Adams has a bad game? No, but his chances of a 30-pointer are lower than normal. And his chances of, why we roster these guys in tournaments is really we're hoping for their 35 to 40-point games. And I feel like his chances of that are low enough that Stephon Diggs is rarely going to go for 35 to 40. He actually can do it, but he's rarely going to do it. And so I usually take the Devontae Adams player over the Stephon Diggs player. But this week, I'm actually going to go with the Stephon Diggs or the Keenan Allen over the Devontae Adams, because I just think that these guys probably have a better chance of getting to 25 to 30. And I think that's kind of where the scoring can end up being capped. And so it wouldn't, Sunday night, it wouldn't shock me if Devontae Adams had 40 points, because he can always do it. But that's not how I'm going to be playing this slate, especially on tighter builds. I have a little bit of exposure. I always have a little exposure to him and Josh Jacobs, but less on tighter builds than I would typically have.
I wonder if I have some FanDuel bias, because he's the 9th most expensive wide receiver on FanDuel. I think the 5th most on DraftKings. But when you get him down to the 9th most expensive wide receiver, I mean, you have to play at least 3 wide receivers on FanDuel, and DraftKings. But I could see him very easily hitting his $7,500 price on that site, even though it's only a half point per reception.
Yeah, and the touchdowns matter so much more, and he can score. If he catches 8 for 70 and 2 touchdowns, that's a lot more valuable on FanDuel than it is on DraftKings.
Yeah, and I generally just like that stack, I think, a little bit better than most people, because I'm high on Josh Allen this week. We could see angry Josh Allen after they lost to the Jets, and the Bills have affordable wide receivers. You can pair Josh Allen, Stephon Diggs, and Devontae Adams pretty easily, and then you can also go to Gabe Davis, who is going to be more of an explosive, scoring threat, and he's currently projected for less than 5% ownership. I think you might see it higher. I think this game stack might get steamed up throughout the week, but there's just a lot of different ways. And then for tight end, I don't think either Bills tight end is going to be popular, because there's 2 of them, but I think either one of them is in play, both Dalton Kincaid and Dawson Knox.
Yeah, the narrative thing, I think sometimes it can be overblown, or sometimes people just totally ignore narratives. But to me, it's when a team well, and that the narrative is there, like last year, AJ Brown against the Titans, and it was the Eagles are going to have to pass in this game, and it's not like it hurts them to focus on AJ Brown. And Nick Sirianni is the type of coach, Jalen Hurts is the type of quarterback, that they're going to love to get AJ Brown a big game against the Titans. It's those types of narratives, we can lean into them. And we know the Bills well enough to say, they don't care. They're fine winning a game 38-10. They don't need it to be the opponent scoring 31 for them to score 38. They're happy to just keep putting up points. And B, they're the type of team that after that loss, which was an embarrassing self-inflicted loss on national television, that they're going to be let's come out and make a statement this game. Unless the Raiders defense plays really well or the Bills offense plays really poorly, it's going to be hard for the Bills to not put up a lot of points in this game, because that's going to be their mentality. And I think they're going to be aggressive about it too, shots downfield and all that. So yeah, I think that's a great spot this week. And their implied total is higher than the Chiefs' implied total, higher than the Jags' implied total. And I don't think that's wrong. I think that we play out the slate 100 times. They outscore those teams, enough times for that to be justified.
Yeah. Okay. So just the 2 other games I wanted to touch on, the Kansas City Jacksonville game. We actually have the 3 high point total games involve the teams that were on prime time, Thursday night and Monday Night Football for week 1. So you had the Bills just finishing up with the Jets on Monday night, but then you've got, it was Kansas City, Detroit to kick off the season. And you've got the 2 remaining games that are the higher scoring games, or highest, point total games, Kansas City at Jacksonville, and then the Seahawks at Detroit. But Kansas City at Jacksonville has the higher point total, 51. I think that'll be a popular game. I think, I don't know, if you had to choose between those 2 games, I guess you said it earlier, you just didn't want to choose between the games.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's one of the ones that the field is definitely going to say, I don't see how this can't be high scoring, right? Well, it's still going to be under 51 points 50% of the time. So it certainly can be not as high scoring as you need at those price tags. At the same time, Seattle has improved on defense. They were already pretty good last year. They had a hard time at the start of the season, mostly communication issues. And Pete Carroll kept saying, like, there's nothing wrong with the defense. It's just like 3 plays here, 2 plays here. And then they got absolutely smashed. What was it? Taysom Hill had like a 37-point fantasy game where Seattle wasn't prepared for what the Saints were going to do with that. Back 2/3 of the season, Seattle defense was solid, right? And then they've gotten better. Detroit defense has definitely gotten better. That game opened at 50 and it's been bet down to 47. So there's certainly that game has more clear paths to the downside than Kansas City, Jacksonville. But in terms of what is the ultimate ceiling compared to the price tags, I don't know that one stands out over the other. Because what can you do with Kansas City? With pairing Mahomes, it's like either Kelsey or just total dart throws. And even with that, like Mahomes can put up 30 and Kelsey puts up 21 and no pass catcher is useful. It's like, man, I could just played Mahomes naked, which is weird because he's not really a running quarterback. And yet just the way that offense is run. And then the Jacksonville side, there's 5 guys. One of them probably puts up a score that's worthy of being on a tournament winner, but there's almost no way to know which of those 5 guys does it. And so, yeah, it's a weird spot. I love that, the potential for that game environment. It's just hard to get a handle on how to build your sharpest roster around that game.
Yeah, I agree. The pricing and like positionals just aren't good for that game. Kelsey's so expensive at tight end but he's the only person that makes sense to pair with Mahomes. Unless you're really, for mass multi-entry, I'll go with some Kadarius Toney. I think Jerick McKinnon makes some sense, but that's really a dart throw. And it's an appropriate dart throw for a 150 lineup set. I don't think it's an appropriate dart throw for single entry. I'll probably try to squeeze in a Mahomes, Kelsey with a Jacksonville run back, maybe like Travis Etienne. But it's difficult. The pricing is difficult. And I don't know. Well, I guess we'll have to see with the injury reports. Like, do we get any screaming value? But I just don't see any screaming value there right now. That's going to let you put in like a really expensive game stack like that. I think of those 4 teams that are in those 2 games, I think I'm most interested in Detroit, where Amon-Ra St. Brown, I think, fits in at wide receiver. And with the other really expensive wide receivers off the slate, he could easily be the top scoring wide receiver this week. And then both the running backs, I think, are in play with David Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs.
Agreed.
I think Gibbs actually had more involvement, I think, than I was expecting for his first game, like kicking off the NFL season. But I think either of those running backs is in play. And I think they're both pretty well priced. So I could see those being like two running backs that I'm using extensively.
Yeah. And notes on, Amon-Ra St. Brown and Travis Kelsey in terms of perception versus reality. I think it would surprise most people to know that over the last 2 seasons, 34 games, Kelsey has topped 23 DraftKings points 9 times. So there's a lot of games in there. It's 25 out of 34 games that he's below 23 DraftKings points. And then last year, Amon-Ra St. Brown, 11 games, and even missed at least 1 game. So he didn't play the full 17 games, 11 games of 15.2 or fewer DraftKings points. So, he's 2/3 of the time, Amon-Ra St. Brown is going out there at that 7,800 price tag and getting you 13 points. And, that's really hurting your roster. And what is it, about 75% of the time or close to that Travis Kelsey is going out there and getting you 16 points, 14 points, 17 points, 20 points. So, and I say that not to talk down on those plays because they're both very much in my player pool, but also I think there's a tendency on a week like this to look at those 2 players and be like, I just don't see how they miss. I don't see how Travis Kelsey misses. I don't see how. And it's not like Justin Jefferson, who put up 30 plus points in half of his games last year. And then last week against a zone heavy Bucks defense, you're like, I don't see how Justin Jefferson misses, and like, that's one thing. It's another thing on these guys who's like, they miss a lot more often than people realize. And it's almost, there's a fear to not play them. And so yeah, I say that just to say, I think all these guys are kind of in the pool, and there's a lot of different viable directions to go. Those higher priced pass catchers across all the teams, Diggs might be my favorite just because he does so rarely finish below 20 points. And it is a week, as I've said, I don't think there will be a lot of 30 plus pointers. So if he gets in that 25 to 32 point range that he can hit, he is really valuable. And if he scores, Josh Allen scores, so you get two spots right at once. But, also Kelsey could go out and put up a 38 pointer. So I'm aware of that. Amon-Ra St. Brown had a 38 pointer, a 42 pointer last year. So I got to account for those as well. But yeah, it's just an interesting slate. There's a lot of solid plays you can put in the bucket for tighter builds. And I think what we're both getting at here is we don't want to branch too far outside of those plays on tighter builds.
Yeah. Actually, there's one more game that's kind of caught in the middle that I totally skipped over that ties in well to having a top-notch wide receiver and also fits with the theme of teams coming back after week one and really trying to change some things up, maybe coming out angry. But the Ravens and Bengals, Baltimore going to Cincinnati. Jamar Chase is actually, is up there in the wide receiver projections. And Cincinnati had just a terribly disappointing week one, but there was some weather involved. It was a divisional game. This is a divisional game as well. But yeah, any thoughts on the Ravens traveling to Cincinnati?
Yeah, that game is so interesting to me. Last year, Joe Burrow threw for 209 yards, 215 yards, and 217 yards against the Ravens. They played in the playoffs as well. So under 220 in all three games. But the year before, the Bengals scored 41 against the Ravens both times they played. So the Bengals can do it against anyone. What always bothers me about them is they're not, and I love Zach Taylor as a coach, but not as an optimizer of scoring potential, and they are different things. He gets the team to maneuvers them to wins, but he could make his path easier by leaning on his weapons to maximize points. So yeah, there is an element there of how aggressive do they get here? And if they have a really good defense, and are they able to hold back the Ravens to where this doesn't become a shootout? But it has sort of potential to be the game that everyone overlooks because Jacksonville, Kansas City's attractive, Buffalo's attractive, Detroit, Seattle's attractive. And then all of a sudden it's well, look at this. This game was 41-31 and we weren't on it at all. So yeah, I think that it's a very interesting game. And I haven't totally crossed it off my list for tighter builds because, and even typically if I want Jamar Chase, I want him as part of a game environment bet, but it's not impossible for him to go for 32 points and, nothing else from that game to really hit. So yeah, that game's in the mix, and Jamar Chase in particular is in the mix for me.
Yeah, I could see myself. I think last week I tried some Deshaun Watson paired with Jamar Chase, and I think this week I could definitely see myself, pairing Lamar Jackson with Jamar Chase, and hoping that Lamar Jackson maybe gets some rushing yards, rushing touchdown, and then Jamar Chase is the focus of the offense for Cincinnati. Although there might be some T. Higgins narrative as well coming out of week one. So, I think that's a game I could see myself having a game stack with multiple pieces in single entry, tournament rosters. But it's probably not going to be my primary build. And I don't know that I would be overweighted in mass multi-entry either.
Yeah. It was, side note, it was really interesting coming off that game where, we talk about angry Josh Allen, the Bills were angry coming off of their loss to the Jets. And obviously it's different personalities, different locker room structures, but Zach Taylor's press conferences, post-game press conferences, Monday press conference, he was smiling the whole time. And he just kept saying to the media, we're going to be fine. It's one game. It's the first game of the season. We're going to be fine. This is not a big deal, which is also true. But I kind of prefer that sense of urgency you get from a team like the Bills where they're we got to go out and prove them, where the Bengals are they're all right, let's go out and win this week, but they're not necessarily let's go out and make a statement. Let's go out and so yeah, that gets pretty deep into the narrative stuff, but that did actually stand out to me of man, these guys are really relaxed about this. And certainly less likely to, those 241 pointers against the Ravens were very much alpha dog games where they were we're gonna show who's the king of the AFC North. And those are the only games in this Taylor Burrow era where they have been proactively trying to score points after they had the game in hand. Every other game in their entire history together, they've had the game in hand and they try to just manage the game to the win from there. And so, yeah, I mean, I could see it just being that type of game where they try to win it 23-20 and just get out of there with the W. But I certainly don't want to overlook the potential for it to go a different direction.
It is probably just different personalities on the coaches and in the locker room, right? Where because we saw Aaron Rodgers do that with the relax, right? And
Yeah.
Green Bay was midpoint of the season or mid early point of the season wasn't doing well, and just like we've lost some games, but every team loses some games. I wonder if it's maybe a matter of expectations where the Bills are really just going out there thinking like they're going to go 17-1 or however many 16-1, however many NFL games we have in a season. Whereas the Bengals are, we're going to lose some games throughout the course of the year. We lost one in the rain, to Cleveland, but now they're kind of playing up to their competition, and now they're going to roll, against Baltimore, and they really want to make a statement, or not. Maybe they're just a little bit too relaxed.
Yeah. I mean, all thoughts to go into the bucket. Like, I don't think any of these direct our decisions, but it's just little pieces to hold on to, I think, as we work through the slate.
Right. All right. Any final thoughts on the week?
No, I think pulling it back to single entry. I always say no when you ask me that, and then I give some thoughts. Pulling it back to single entry, I think it's important this week to recognize that there's not just one good game, there's several good games. And so if you don't have players from those good games, it's highly unlikely that all of those games miss, right? And so there's going to be people you're competing against who have exposure to those games, and you have to account for that as you build. So again, for me, the way I'll account for that is having a lot of exposure to the games that I like. Obviously, can't have it to all of the games at once, but I think it's sharp this week to make sure that you're accounting for some of those games with higher scoring potential. Obviously, you can take some pieces from other places, but I think that's an important thing to pay attention to in single entry 3 max this week.
Yeah, I think for single entry for my tighter builds, I think I will be focusing on the higher point total games, but I won't be afraid to take like a value piece, like particularly on DraftKings where things go down to like 3,000. Like I won't be afraid to take like a Luke Musgrave tight end if I think that fits a game stack from a higher cost game, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Or Tank Dell on the Texans. With that, that's everything I have.
All right. That'll do it for us for our soloship for week 2. Good luck, everybody. We'll see you in week 3.